afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. So this is, we're here to discuss state legislation, different bills that we can chime in and express our support, opposition, or no position. And so, Ms. Melanie Wenger, you're here with your team, and let's get started.
Great. Thank you. So we have both a memo and a chart. So I think we'll kind of walk back and forth. But we'll start with the memo, because the first bullet in the memo, at the back of the memo, you've got a couple of attachments, and it's just the real basics about the state budget and the impacts on Montgomery County. And state budget is, as we currently sit here, not a huge story. It's slightly out of balance, like $62 million out of a $19 billion budget, which is pretty much not exactly a rounding error, but really close. All the formulas are fully funded. The chart all the way on the back, let me see if I can find it, what circle it is. I don't know how these circles work right now, but it looks like it's page 1, Amanda? No? Okay. So you'll see the school system is in for the operating funding formula called Thornton still, about $28 million. And I did see a press release in the Bethesda Beat that was somewhat of a surprise, but there's nothing going on in this formula other than a combination of enrollment and relative wealth. So there's no additional add-ons to that. It's just a function of the formula that it apparently spun off more cash than what the school system thought it would. So that's the number, libraries, transportation, really no big surprises. The second sheet, if you turn to the back, is what the capital budget looks like for the county. Again, as it stands, this is, the top part is.
Yeah, can you tell us where?
Yes.
We got too many papers in front of us.
Bullet 2.
Page 2.
It's their page 2, it's this big,
Is that what it's called?
No, these page numbers are.
It's page 2, that's their packet, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll figure this out.
Okay, yeah. Just keep us confused.
Some capital sheet way back deep in the pack. Good luck finding it, and I'll speak from it, and we'll all be totally confused. So anyhow, there's obviously the public school construction program. There's going to be a lot to talk about on that front, likely later on. But this is, the state law requires that 75% of what I call the base program be allocated, honestly, before the legislature convenes. So this is the 75% allocation of the base program, plus that supplemental program called the Enrollment Growth and Relocatable Classroom Program that was kind of the consolation prize of when the county, along with Prince George's County and Baltimore County, went after the Baltimore City Stadium Authority leveraging deal, and we've done very well out of this program. So this $12 million here is the estimation of what the $40 million would spin off to Montgomery County. Montgomery College, the only thing I would say about this is, I think you look back at our priorities list that we did in November. That priorities list, which is what I compared this to, showed that first project, the Silver Spring project, at I think $35 million. I think what's going on there is $35 million might have been the number I received from the community colleges. That was the total cost of the project, and you could likely expect a project like that to be phased. And I believe that's what's going on here, but I haven't had the opportunity to talk to the community college people. Everything else is pro forma. If you look, most of the money that's accumulating towards the 144.5 at the bottom is really environmental programs. So there's not a lot driving this other than kind of routine grant making in the state's capital budget. What's not on here? The Poolsville project is not on here. So that's $1 million, and we'll just approach that through the local legislative initiatives process. And so I think the prospects are good for that we would be able to secure another $1 million. That would bring that total up to $3 million. The Avery Road Treatment Center has a cost overrun. It's about $840,000, so that's not in here. So we'll be talking to Delegate Resnick and Senator Zucker, their Health and Human Services committees on budget committees to try and see if we couldn't make some headway on that. And then we had a community project, I call it community project, the Roundhouse Theater that we did include on the priorities list. It's not a county project per se, but it's a county project it's a project in the community that's been supported by the county. So that was $3 million, and that's not on here. And that's the story here, just quickly touching base on public school construction. The governor's piece of legislation has been introduced. There's not a great deal of surprise. I did send some bullets out about, I think, to the council president about what the piece of legislation looks like. It looks a lot like the Baltimore City Public Schools legislation. There are a couple of differences. One is that the projects would queue up through the Interagency Committee on School Construction process. So it would be the same process for what I describe as the base program. That's what the administration bill contemplates. And there was also concern registered early on, well, would the stadium authority manage all the projects? The piece of legislation does have the stadium authority managing all the projects with a caveat, and that's that the IAC could deem county government or a school system of sorts what I will describe as capable or having the capacity to manage their own projects and receive a waiver from that. The program starts out with a $45 million appropriation and $20 million into a revolving loan fund that's a set aside for counties that would not have the ability to forward fund. And then the bill also increases the stadium authority's debt limit by about $1.9 billion and tags $125 million a year out of the Education Trust Fund. Long, complicated story. Talk to you later if you want all the ugly details. To make the debt service on that payment. So it's a program that would, that $125 million would leverage in the administration package about $1.9 billion above and beyond what I call the base program and the targeted supplemental grant program that I show here. So potentially, well, a lot more money. If, again, it's a proposal, I think there will be competing proposals. But I think overall it's good news because this is front and center as a piece of conversation in Annapolis. It's very, very important to this county and a number of other counties. So that's the backdrop.
Pause there. I just want to alert my colleagues that I don't have names on the lights. So I'll just kind of look to my right and my left, just wave. I'll put you down, in case. Any questions or comments regarding this initial Councilmember Remo?
Thank you, Melanie. So again, what we see on the top of page 2 is not the potential of the new initiative that the governor put forward. This is this year's bump. So,
That's correct.
Right.
So what I describe it as the base program. This is the typical 75% allocation of the base program. The denomination of that program is what it was last year.
and the amount of money, if the governor's proposal went through as he proposed it, what's the dollar amount relative to what we see here?
Well, he's leveraging $1.9 billion with the $125 million in debt service. How that,
It's an annual,
itself
it's an
out.
annual,
no, that would be the value of the package.
okay.
So the details of how that is kind of, I guess, translated into an IAC process, the stadium authority development of the program, how it ramps up, how counties are able to make a match on this additional fund, because most counties, big counties certainly have a capital improvement plan that projects out and balances interest in that capital budget. I think that all those details are going to need to be discussed, and as they become kind of more apparent, I'll come back to you with more information about it.
I had seen that the proposal had a 50% match for the county, I believe, for Montgomery County. Would that have to be in addition to our current capital budget, or is it matching projects that we're already planning to do? Do you have any way to know what their intention was?
Well, the concept behind that is that is an IAC. Every county has, by virtue of their wealth, among other things, a requirement to match what's deemed to be eligible costs of any project.
Okay.
So that's the status quo.
Most of an existing project potentially that they could pay for.
Right, or a project in the future. It's just how that process works and what the state has required out of counties. I mean, you know, some counties don't have a 50/50. A place like Somerset has a 100%. So it's, depends on the county, but the process, as I understand, a quick read of the bill would remain largely the same in that proposal.
Councilmember Friedson?
Thank you. I just want to piggyback off of that. So my understanding is the 50% is the same funding formula that we currently have. This would make more money available to all of the jurisdictions. We would have to pony up more money locally in order to access it if we're putting in 50% of that money, but this would increase the pot of money for school construction projects statewide. Is that correct?
That's how I understand the proposal after reading it, but I've not, you know, I've read it quickly, and that's how I understand the proposal.
And the way that you were saying is, you think that it would go through the same IAC process. It would just, you know, normally now, the way the IAC process works, you know, a large percentage of the projects in the pipeline aren't funded because there's not enough money to fund it at the state level, and this would just increase that pie so that more projects statewide would be able to be funded, which some of which we hope, lots of which would include Montgomery counties.
That's how I understand the proposal. I mean, just for example, I mean, you know, you're tracking at about 59 million a year in state funds, you know, and that would change, but you would need to make that match. I mean, there was a $113 million request by the school system. They have a backlog of, or what, their program is about 1.6 billion, so the concept would be that there would be an opportunity to advance in the queue on projects like that.
And then, would there be any implications? I think I know we forward fund many of our projects, and I think we're the only jurisdiction in the state that does forward fund. Is there any change or benefit or impact that forward funding would have in terms of this new pot of money?
I would say Montgomery's not the only county that forward funds, but I think that this has to kind of be worked out. And when you look at what the county's, you know, capital improvement plan looks like, and you see how much of that is forward funding, I think it starts to become a math exercise that I wouldn't want to engage in on how all this starts to shift out. And again, we're not working with a lot of information right now, so I don't want to say something that's, you know, people commit to memory and it turns out to be dead wrong. So,
Well, we'll have plenty of opportunity to.
yeah, we'll have plenty of opportunity to do that, so.
Details. Okay, great. So let's get into the bills.
Okay, all right. We'll just, we're gonna walk through the memo. That's some of the, you have a chart too, but there's, in some cases, some more comprehensive information in the memo, so we'll go through the memo, but feel free to revert to the chart too and make your own markings on that. And
Right, and I want to also thank Amanda Myhill for having, also she put together a chart for us, and it also has different analysts that have chimed in and can, you know, further explain if we need to as well.
Right, and we might actually want to consider just consolidating into a.
Yeah. I was going to suggest that. It'd be great.
Kind of crazy.
It'd be awesome. Okay.
Okay, so
Let's do it.
I'm gonna let everyone pick up their bills as they see fit, and we'll just walk through the list
Alright.
unless somebody wants to divert from that list.
Good morning. The first bill, House Bill 84, makes some changes to the Maryland Farms and Family Fund. You may recall this from 2 years ago. It was a fund that was created to leverage federal funds to encourage farmers markets, healthy food, purchases with SNAP, and a couple other programs. The primary change that it's making is the bill is going to require the governor to appropriate $500,000 to the fund annually, beginning in fiscal year 2021. Prior to that, it was whether or not there was money subject to the budget. In FY 2019, he left out any funding for it. The General Assembly subsequently put $200,000 back in. The county executive supports the bill.
All right, any comments from my colleagues?
Good.
Councilmember Hooker.
Well, I'm all for it. I think it's a great bill, but is the governor likely to veto this, in your estimation? It's a mandatory appropriation.
I don't know.
Okay.
I have no problem with mandatory appropriations.
Right, I
These are-
mean,
I'd rather they mandate all the appropriations.
He has typically, not been pleased when he gets handed
Right.
something that, so I don't know, but,
But
it's
anyway.
a different day.
I think it's a lovely bill.
So,
All right, without
tell the
objection, I guess, should we then support this bill? And council staff also recommends support, so we'll say yes. All right.
Oh, this is, House Bill 91, this is, excuse me, a piece of legislation that actually was heard last week. It came in very, very quickly, and was heard on, let's see here, was it heard Tuesday morning? It was heard jointly by 2 House committees. This is about the traffic relief plan and whether or not there should be a requirement in the P3 statute, the Public-Private Partnership State Statute, which is a procurement statute that would require for a project like this and other similar projects in the future that the draft environmental impact statement be completed before a pre-solicitation report is submitted and approved by the Board of Public Works and the Budget Committees. So that's the story. The county executive supported the bill. And it's got very tight timelines, I will say, because the pre-solicitation report was submitted. And so if there's a request for an extension, I think February 10 is the timeframe within which, in current state statute, that there needs to be action taken by the Board of Public Works and the Budget Committee on that proposal.
All right, Ms. Myhill, anything you want to add?
Council staff is supporting the bill, and Dr. Orland, I think, is here if you have any further questions.
Okay, all right, what about my colleagues? Any particular, everybody is good with this bill? Okay, we'll support it.
Madam President, Melanie,
Yes.
before we leave the Beltway,
Oh, your microphone.
You're stuck on the Beltway?
my first time here. I'm stuck on the Beltway.
Yeah.
Literally. I believe in a previous state ledge meeting, we were going to come back to Delegate Carr's bill regarding tolling, MC 819, but I don't think it's on the list. Is that the case?
I am not aware that the bill's been withdrawn.
The sponsor's here. You could add one way or,
Hasn't been withdrawn yet, but I think the idea is House Bill 91 might be a better vehicle to address concerns that have been expressed.
enough said. Okay.
Thank you, Delegate Cart. Okay,
The next bill, House Bill 120 SB 203, deals with the definition of no net loss for forest. Right now, under current law, the no net loss forest means that 40% of all land in Maryland is covered by tree canopy. And this is any area covered by trees that are viewed from above. The bill would change it to 40% of all land in Maryland must be covered by forest land. This is a much narrower definition. It requires essentially a woodsy habitat, and there has to be trees that are capable of producing timber. The county executive supports this bill. This is an ongoing process. There's been several years where they've tried to create a task force, the advocates and other stakeholders as well.
all right, Council.
In your package of materials, council staff initially expressed opposition to the bill, but in light of materials that came in a bit later, we recommend support of the bill.
I do also want to mention that as drafted, the bill is not going to interfere with our county programs, according to the county attorney's office.
Because the county legislation is more stringent than?
There are 2 definitions, one for one for forest area and the other for treed area. We define both. The state law had a provision where tree canopy was included in the definition of forest. So this allows the state to distinguish those areas, because the legislation thereafter deals with trees separately from forests, separately from woodland. So this would allow the state to prioritize for forest and doesn't affect our law.
Okay. All right, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President. I think that got to my question. I was just going to say, what was the additional information, but that was it? Yes. Okay, all right. So it's not impacting what we're.
The problem we first had was it was touted as a technical correction, and it really was very much substantive. And there was lots of studies to say we substantively want to make this change, and it's that information that we got last week.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any objection to supporting this bill? Nope, so without objection, we will support it. Okay,
If I can have you go to number 5 next instead of number 4, we have Dr. Gales, the health officer, on hand, and he has to leave shortly.
which one is number?
If you have any questions,
Which one is that one on the, because we have two charts.
we'll have him now. Number 5,
The
139 and 135.
just skip ahead one bill, please. It's House Bill 139, Senate Bill 135. Okay.
Got it.
What this bill would do, it would enable the Maryland Department of Health, in consultation with the local health departments, to establish what we call safe consumption sites throughout the state. And what would happen at these safe consumption sites, it's a supervised place where people can come and use illicit drugs under supervision. There are a number of services that are offered at these sites, including sterile needle provision and disposal, first aid, monitoring participants for potential overdose, as well as connecting people to supportive services like treatment and education about risks of using intravenous drugs, things like that.
Okay. Any thoughts? All right, without objection, we support it.
Thank you.
Finish it. The
Right, now-
doctor's leaving the house, is that what you're saying?
Okay, now we can go back to number 4, the previous page. It's House Bill 127, Senate Bill 36. So what this bill would do, basically, would make pregnancy a triggering event for a special enrollment period for 3 types of insurance. The first would be a special enrollment plan, a special enrollment period for small employer health benefit plans, and that would allow an eligible employee or their spouse to enroll during pregnancy. The other 2 are for folks who want to enter the individual market through the exchange or outside of the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange, and that would be for the individual or their dependents, should they become pregnant.
And it says council staff recommends the council support with amendment.
Right, the amendment would be, as everyone knows, postpartum is also an important time for a woman's health, and so we would suggest amending it that the enrollment period be extended until 90 days postpartum.
Is everybody okay with that suggestion? All right, so we will support it. Okay.
So we then would move to item 6, which is a departmental proposal by MCDOT and Police Department for electric low-speed scooters. This would be legislation that would classify electric low-speed scooters or e-scooters, Lime, bike, type of things you see in DC, as bicycles under the transportation article. By doing it as bicycles, there is a local authority that's granted specifically for sidewalks that bicycles would be prohibited on sidewalks statewide. They are now, except if a local jurisdiction says that they can be there. The department, and I have DOT and the police department here if there are specific questions about it, but it was viewed as these devices are coming. Right now, there's no way to regulate them. To do nothing doesn't really seem like the best way to go about doing it. There is another bill that came in, a Senate bill. We don't have, our bill is in bill drafting, so we don't have a number for it yet. But there's Senate Bill 14 that was introduced by a senator from Baltimore City, that originally looked like it didn't apply to e-scooters. It was only to apply to hoverboards. But he has introduced an amendment that has not been accepted by the committee, but if he's successful with the amendment, e-scooters would be in his legislation as well. His bill was heard last week in JPR. There were a lot of questions about it. Senator Lamb was the only person speaking. And I think it's going to be a much greater discussion because the committee seemed rather confused about what was going to be allowed and what wasn't, and what local authority could do and what Ocean City was doing, and would this mean that, we wouldn't be able to do what we can do, and what about helmets? And it got quite complicated. But this is legislation that our office has, the county executive supports. It would be, Senator Smith has agreed to sponsor the bill on the Senate side because it would go to JPR. Delegate Fraser Hidalgo has agreed to sponsor it in the House. It would go to his committee, and he is the chair of the Transportation Subcommittee, so he would be able to sort of guide it through. We're looking for your support for a
Councilmember
position.
Bernos?
So I definitely support this bill. I do have a couple of questions, though, with regard specifically to helmet use. And has that been discussed? Does the county and the state's bicycle helmet provisions for would that also extend to this use as well?
Under our proposal, we don't get into the details of what would be required. What we would propose, and Kathleen and Boucher and I are working on this together, but how our bill would be defined is the state would do it as bicycles, and then it's up to the local jurisdiction to decide what things you want to put in there, whether there would be an age limit, whether there would be helmets, whether, the number of these devices, assuming you bring them to Montgomery County, the number that you would have allowed in particular areas where they would need to be distributed. There would be all sorts of things then that you could then put in at the local level. That said, the issue of helmets is something when we were meeting with Delegate Fraser Hidalgo and Senator Smith, both raised as helmets are really an important thing. So it could be, right now there's a state helmet law is 16 and under. Montgomery County, I'm almost positive, is 18, or under the age of 18. Kathleen, did you want to add anything?
No, thank you, sir. I was just you just touched on exactly what I was going to speak to. State law versus county law, it's 16 versus 18 right now.
Great.
Okay. Councilmember Reamer?
I think this is a good initiative. We need to start figuring out how we're going to embrace this technology and this type of mobility, and this legalizes it and allows us to develop an approach here, and we can take it up in turn. But I'm glad to see this moving forward. Appreciate MCDOT bringing this out.
Thank you. Okay, without objection, I think we can support this. Excellent.
Thank you.
Now into the local bills, so we'll go ahead and go through this. The first one is the Just Cause legislation.
Before we do that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Reamer, Chair of the Fed Committee.
Thank you. Our joint committee meeting last week, Public Safety and Fed Committee took this issue up. We had a really terrific discussion. We didn't get all the way through it. There's some more questions. I understand that we have several weeks before a position is really needed by the council, so the chair and I would like to ask for a little more time to do some follow-up. So if that's acceptable, thanks.
Is that okay with everybody? All right, so we'll come back to that. Councilmember Jawanda.
And just to confirm, I saw you nodding, but is that indeed the case on the timing?
I did speak to the House delegation chair, and I think he is relatively anxious for some information to be shared as far as a potential position from the council, if they want to, weigh in on the proposal. So I'd say that I think I might have misspoken a little bit about, that's kind of how the process would work, but because this is also in the local process, I think he'd appreciate it as timely as possible to hear back from you, yeah.
Because we had a robust discussion, and I think there are viewpoints in the, Councilmember Reamer's correct. I think there are some things we want to follow up on, but I'm aware of that. I don't want to miss our opportunity to chime in because I think we should chime in.
And I'll share this information that, we had this discussion and that you're looking to move forward on this.
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Hooker.
Just to answer that question, it is on the February 3rd House delegation agenda. I don't know if you said that, so
Okay.
we won't be meeting before the 3rd, I don't believe.
Well, I guess we could take a poll. So will my colleagues prefer to wait a little longer and then we can poll it the way we do via email, or that's one option?
Is that right? That's
a
the Sunday.
Sunday.
That's, I'm reading from the,
Did we meet on Sunday?
oh, this is, beg your pardon.
Not an agenda? I mean, okay, I don't have anything in
Sorry,
front of
I'm
me.
looking, nope. My bad. It was December 3rd. So I don't see a February date on here, so
The next.
it's not yet scheduled.
The next step for the bill will be to be in the subcommittee, the Economic Development Subcommittee, to which it's assigned. I don't see it yet on the agenda for Thursday, this coming Thursday, which is the next meeting for that subcommittee.
A little bit more time.
Yeah, but we can take it up. Okay.
All right, so we will confer, Amanda, so we can track the timing, and then if we need to do it via, consulting with everybody, we will, and then we'll develop a position. And I would like for us to also keep in mind that if for some reason there isn't consensus for support or opposition, we also have no position as an option, so we will circle back with everybody and coordinate that. Okay. All right. Yes, Councilmember Glass.
Just point of clarification, so is it the intention of the Fed Committee Chair to have another public discussion on this issue?
I'm not sure that we need another joint committee meeting. I think we just had some follow-up questions to explore, and we'll see what those yield. But I will share the results of any further information that I get with everybody.
Great, thank you.
Member Katz, Council Vice President.
Yeah, and it was a joint committee meeting for public safety and Fed, and I agree with Councilmember Reamer that I think that we certainly did have a very good discussion. I think that we did reach conclusions on much of it, but there still is much that we would like to make certain how we're going forward with it and the practical side of it. So I think that we don't need another complete joint committee, but I do think we need to have some thoughts and answers to what we raised.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to page 8 of the memo and Bill MCPG 10319. We're bringing this bill back to you because there are some amendments for your consideration. The bill itself, you've already taken a position on, and I'll walk through it briefly, but you oppose the bill. County Executive supports it, Park and Planning opposes it. And as I mentioned, there's some amendments that are in your packet, back on the attachments that are, where the page numbers are at the bottom. And those amendments are on pages 6 and 7. So just as a refresher, what the bill does is it relates to the 12 municipalities that right now under state law, the county zoning laws apply to. And those 12 municipalities are listed there in that first paragraph on page 8. So under state law, as I mentioned, those 12, as opposed to the other 7 municipalities in the county zoning laws apply. And the other 7, they have their own zoning laws. So these counties can't enforce, these municipalities, for the most part, except for 2, can't enforce the county zoning laws. And kind of that's the current status. In that category of 12, there's actually a subcategory, and it's Tacoma Park and Kensington. And Tacoma Park and Kensington have been given some special authority. They have authority, what's called concurrent jurisdiction, to enforce the county's zoning laws. So if they have staff and want to do the inspections themselves, they can. They also have the benefit of a supermajority requirement, so that if those municipalities oppose an action of the planning board or the district council, if they pass a resolution opposing it, it triggers a supermajority requirement for both the planning board and the council. So instead of a majority vote, it's 2/3. So instead of 3, it's 4 at the planning board and 6 votes here at the district council. So the interesting thing about the bill is it would extend to all 12 of these municipalities that authority, both the enforcement authority and the supermajority requirement, if they adopted a state an ethics law that the State Ethics Commission approves. So that was the original bill, and the effect of the original bill was essentially to mean that only Tacoma Park has that concurrent and supermajority requirement because Kensington currently doesn't have a local ethics law approved by the State Ethics Commission. So the amendments that you see in your packet are really two substantive amendments. One amendment would address Kensington, and essentially that amendment would return Tacoma Park and Kensington to the same place that they are under current law, separate from adoption of a state ethics law. So that would mean Tacoma Park has a state ethics, or a local ethics law approved by the State Ethics Commission. Kensington doesn't, but they're left untouched by the bill, by that First Amendment. The Second Amendment would impact two other municipalities, it's my understanding from speaking to Delegate Carr. It's Town of Chevy Chase and Chevy Chase Village. So the way the original bill was drafted, the municipality would have to have its local ethics law fully approved by the State Ethics Commission. And there's three major components. It's financial disclosure, lobbying, conflicts of interest. And as the bill came in, if a municipality had its local ethics law fully approved for all those three components, then it triggered this authority granted by the bill. The other amendment that you see there would say that for a municipality that has gotten a partial approval, that they also could would get the benefit of the concurrent jurisdiction and the supermajority requirement. So if they had gotten approval for conflicts of interest but not the other two components, they would be eligible for this additional authority or any other one of the one or two components. So those are the amendments, and the Delegate Carr has asked for the council's consideration as to supporting or opposing those amendments.
Okay, before we do that, Ms. Myhill, can you,
Council staff continues to oppose the bill even with amendments because council staff views it as diminishing the role of the council's land use authority.
correct? Okay, Delegate Carr, if you would like to make some comments, you can. I think that we have historically opposed these types of bills precisely because of that particular issue. It does diminish our land use authority, and I think it's important for our colleagues to remember that. So, Councilman.
Good afternoon.
Delegate Carr.
Good afternoon, Madam President and council members. The intent of this bill is to expand a policy that has been in place for over 30 years. Tacoma Park has had, for over 30 years, had this privilege. It's worked well. It encourages collaboration. Back in 2007, the General Assembly passed a bill to expand this to Kensington. The council at the time supported that bill, and Park and Planning opposed it. And our then delegates, Hucker and Rice, voted in favor of that bill. So in the over 10 years it's been in place in Kensington, it has worked well and encouraged collaboration. The intent of this bill is to expand that policy to some additional municipalities. The mayor of Kensington testified in the hearing in support of the bill as amended, now that it clarifies that they're grandfathered in. So, thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Katz.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Delegate Carr, for being here. As you know, I'm very supportive of municipalities, and I understand why this would be done. Of course, Tacoma Parks was a very different situation than Kensington. And Tacoma Park, so many years ago, was partially in Prince George's County and partially in Montgomery County, and had a special consideration involved with it. But I have to look back at what the planning board is suggesting, and that's the supermajority part. I think that's really asking too much, and as they point out, they only have 5 members, so that would mean that at least 4 would have to agree, and if someone is sick or it's something that they couldn't act on it, and there's the subdivision regulations, as they point out, there's specific timelines that they have to deal with. So I can't be supportive of this the way it is written. Thanks.
Okay, Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Councilmember Katz, Council Vice President Katz. Appreciate that comment. I agree with you. I think it's perfectly okay for residents of those municipalities to look to the county for their zoning. I think that is a perfectly fine system. It has worked well, and I think it'll continue to work well. I think a supermajority requirement for the council to do zoning there doesn't really serve any particular great purpose. I think this approach that we have now is just fine. Thanks.
Member Glass?
Thank you, Madam President. Delegate Carr, thank you for being here. One of the things I appreciate about you is your creativity in lawmaking, and this is certainly on display here. But the question I have for you is about the ethics, and why the need to create a carve-out, or what I would call a loophole, for a municipality that doesn't currently subscribe to the state's ethics laws?
Right, so, the approach in 2007 was to specifically name Kensington. And so we could have done that for going forward. If there are specific municipalities that want this, we could have written bills that name specific municipalities, but the approach instead was to create some criteria by which municipalities might be granted this authority. My thinking was, if you're going to play in planning and zoning, there should be assurances that you have an ethics law that's been approved by the state. So that would be the criteria under this bill, which would tend to limit it to the larger of those municipalities that don't have planning and zoning. And the amendments are, one is technical, one is to just clarify for Kensington that they're grandfathered in, and then the third one was at the request of another municipality that wanted to benefit from this rule.
While you currently represent the wonderful people of District 18, you were once, in a previous life, a council member in the town of Kensington. Can you share why the town doesn't adhere to the state's ethics laws in that regard for elected officials?
So I can't speak for Kensington. I was on the Kensington Council, but Kensington does have an ethics law that includes conflict of interest and disclosure and lobbying, but for some reason they have not been certified by the state. They could ask to be certified by the state, but they haven't done that.
Well, I appreciate that.
They requested to be grandfathered in.
And that's the focus point that catches me up, that if we have this statewide ethics bills for elected officials and municipalities, and this bill is working around that, that is a problem for me. And I would encourage, if it's the town of Kensington that wants to enact some of these changes, I would ask them not to be grandfathered in, but come up to the current code in that respect.
Okay. If you want to do that, then you would support this bill without that amendment, grandfathering in Kensington.
I didn't exactly say that, but as currently presented to us, I have a problem with it because of this component.
Okay, Council Vice President Katz?
Thank you. Thank you. First off, and Al, you're going to have to refresh my memory too, but when the ethics law first came out for municipalities, there were certain exemptions for municipalities. The size of the municipality mattered, and being that if there's a town of 100 people, that they didn't have the same criteria or needed the ethics law at that time. I don't know whether any of that is still in existence, and I don't know whether or not anybody in Montgomery County, I guess like Barnesville would still be under that, if it is still in existence. So that's part of the whole thing for the ethics law. And then if the municipality had its own ethics law prior to the state enforcing one or legislating one, then there was some question how long you had to become the state. You had to use the same forms or whatever the right term is for that. There was a lot of issues involved with it. So I don't know why Kensington decided to or not to, but there could be some of that logic involved with it.
Okay. So I guess what I'm hearing is that we do not support this bill, so we will communicate opposition. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate Carr. Appreciate it. Okay.
Okay, this next bill on page 9, MCPG 10619, is another land use and planning related bill. The county executive, just to frame it, supports this bill with an amendment. The council has not yet taken a position. It's a bill that, as it came in, would require that certain documents that are filed with the planning board in the course of a subdivision process are certified under penalty of perjury. And it lists, the original bill lists forest conservation plan, natural resources inventory, forest and delineation, forest mitigation bank application, and a catch-all, any concept plan or local development plan that doesn't include those pieces. The county executive supports the bill, but also requests an amendment to extend that penalty of perjury certification to a disclosure of recorded easements and public rights-of-way. And so the county executive's initial amendment is on page 9 of the attachments, but events have sort of moved on to really a consideration of a different amendment. And that amendment is on the attachment, page 10. So, and Adrienne Gardner, I noticed from the planning board legal staff, is here, and so I'll try to speak accurately to their perspective, but he of course is also here. So the planning staff redrafted the bill, essentially, as we understand it, substantively the same, except it deleted the penalty of perjury. There were some other language changes, but on the whole, it was requiring a certain type of certification that you can see there on page 10 for all of the listed documents and any other regulatory development application. So what you see on page 10 is what planning staff drafted with 2 changes. So Senator Kramer looked at this and said, I'm okay with the planning staff's amendments, but I want to add back in penalty of perjury. So what you see there at the bottom, again in the certification, you can't quite tell from the black and white, but the under penalty of perjury language was added back in by Senator Kramer. And then county staff added language in paragraph B of this section that relates to certification regarding recorded easements and rights-of-way. So what you have here is a consensus amendment. It has been approved by the planning board last week, and it incorporates, at this point, planning staff perspective, Senator Kramer's perspective, and the county executive's perspective. So we have it here for your consideration and position.
And I'll ask Mr. Sines also to approach Ms. Myhill.
Council staff is recommending the council oppose this, and Jeff can walk through why.
If we were charging for words in statutes, this would be a significant charge for words that I think are unnecessary. Right now, the application for a subdivision requires certification by essentially engineers that the information is true and is accurate. When it fails, or you find out that it's not, you essentially go against the license. There are civil penalties for being incompetent if you're holding a professional engineering license, and that's who typically gets this. This adds a penalty for perjury if you that it wasn't delivered to the best of my knowledge. Well, gee, who's going to prove that one? That it wasn't to the best of their knowledge. Maybe it was partially to their good knowledge. The circumstances under which that there would actually be a charge of perjury are so remote that I think the language is unnecessary.
Okay, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, my main question here was what problem were we solving? I mean, I think, the number one question we should be asking before we introduce bills either here at the state level is, what problem are we solving? I'm not quite sure I understand the real problem that we have now and how this solves it.
There is a case, I think, that's still in court where a engineer did not put in a right-of-way or easement that might have been or should have been indicated on a plat. I believe that's still in litigation on a civil basis. But I don't know that this legislation would have solved that issue.
Yeah, I have concerns about penalty of perjury. I mean, generally, penalty of perjury is put in place in instances where it's a relatively unsophisticated actor, like a taxpayer, and it's a relatively high burden to prove that you knowingly presented information that was wrong, and that's to limit the burden on that person. There's lots of federal forms and other government forms where it's penalty of perjury, and the whole purpose is to protect that person. In this case, when you're subdividing a plot, you generally have a land use attorney. I mean, this is a sophisticated enterprise that somebody is engaging in, and having penalty of perjury be the standard seems to not be the appropriate area that we should have. And so I have concerns, and I would, support the council staff.
Thank you, Councilor Jawanda.
Thank you, Council President. Are there any folks from planning here? Okay, if they could join. Yeah.
You got there and everybody's scattered. I don't know, that's tough, you're tough.
Off the hot seats.
We just have they're very courteous. It had nothing to do with your size or stature. It was,
They weren't evading ships, they
Yeah.
were courteous, yeah.
So, thank you. And if you could, a couple questions. The consensus amendment, could you just explain from planning's perspective why you were okay with this and what, to the point that has kind of been raised, what problem, if any, do you think this solves in the context of these cases?
Sure. For the record, Adrienne Gardner, General Counsel for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. We had a situation where the planning staff shared Mr. Zions's concerns completely. In order to make the bill work effectively, there were the initial set of amendments in subparagraph B were designed to make it sort of integrate. There were some technical issues in the way that the original bill was drafted that I frankly, I'm not even familiar with, but one of our attorneys worked on that aspect of it. And I think as Ms. Boucher pointed out, the concern that our staff had with penalties of perjury was exactly what you've sort of described. We're not aware of a specific issue that this was designed to resolve. But at, the county exec, we understood that this was important to the county executive. The county executive requested it, and the planning board did not find that there would be any impact on the work program per se, and sort of left it to the discretion. And so,
So you were just, technically it works, it wasn't, you didn't feel passion either way, but you.
Precisely. I think that's a fair way to put it,
And
where we landed.
to the point, the only thing I could think of is if this is a high standard, unless there was discovery and there were emails and someone was it was revealed that someone was deliberately lying to try to deceive and not say, hey, we're never going to build that easement. I'm just trying to understand from the county executive's perspective. I'm assuming that is part of it. They just think people are deliberately lying with the development community when they're saying they're going to do something and they're not. Is anyone?
I wouldn't, the county executive has not shared with me that he presumes they're lying, but he is, I'm not sure Jeff, Mr. Zients was referring to the Farm Road situation, but I know the county executive has experience with that situation, and some of the incumbent council members here who've been elected would be familiar with that as well. That involved recorded easements and rights-of-way, and I know he thinks that the failure to accurately disclose recorded easements and rights-of-way can dramatically affect people's lives. And Mr. Zients would be more familiar, I think, with the Farm Road situation. And so I think he felt that these kinds of disclosures can dramatically affect property owners' interests, and that the other documents that were highlighted by Senator Kramer, which relate to forest conservation and natural resources, also are a very high priority, and that accuracy is very important.
Yeah, and for environmental reasons. So Jeff, then my question to you then is the objection that it's just so hard to prove, or is it also that you don't think this is a real issue that?
I don't think it's a real issue. I think the chances of somebody actually being charged by the state's attorney with perjury are so low that it's hardly worth it, that the real penalties here are civil liability, and for every major subdivision at all that's dealing with a right-of-way, there's an engineer involved.
Thank you.
Senator Reamer. And then we turn it over.
Thank you. And again, the cost benefit, if it's not a real issue, or if the possibility of enforcement is so remote, there are everyday consequences for the industry or the processes. And if, as you point out, it requires additional insurance or other things, it's a regulation that could have an effect in the process without really identifying any meaningful benefit.
Right. I did not research or look up liability insurance for engineers to see whether they were already covered for this. If they knowingly do it, I suspect they are not covered for it. So it might mean that if this is an unusual requirement in Montgomery County, they might be less willing to be an engineer in Montgomery County because they have to sign this. I don't know what impediment it will bring, but then again, I have no knowledge of any benefit it will bring.
Madam President, just in the interest of complete candor, because the Farm Road case came up, I want to make it clear to the council that I'm very familiar with the Farm Road case, having been a defendant and a lawyer at different times, and sometimes both. But the point that I wanted to make is that I shared Mr. Zients' issue that I'm not sure that this would actually have addressed it in that case. That was kind of the point that I wanted to make.
Thank you, appreciate
Because I wanted you to be clear about that.
Thank you for the record. Okay, so I'm hearing that we would oppose this bill, is that correct? Okay, we will be in opposition of this bill. Okay. Is that it?
That's what we have for you today.
Okay, great, so we'll follow up on some other issues. Councilor Huff.
Can I add one to the list?
Sure.
I think my staff had texted you about this, but I didn't see on the list MC 11419 having to do with WSSC's collective bargaining unit? Okay.
There's already been action on that. Which bill number, Councilmember Hunter?
Did we take a position on that?
11419.
I don't trust my
Very
memory.
bitter end on the page 24.
It's a Senator Kramer bill.
I think
Right,
this
that-
bill was voted on.
That's been approved.
Yeah, it's been
That's
voted.
been approved?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Mr. Andes
Oh,
might
I
know
should say
that.
approved by the House delegation. It now moves on to the House Standing Committee and the Senate delegation.
Great, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. We're adjourned.